Hello, everybody. This is Roger Struckhoff with Cloud Expo and Cloud Expo TV. You know, this time of year, we should be in New York or Santa Clara holding an event. But there's been this thing called COVID-19 that's been going around and had a profound effect on business, on individuals, on the world, and certainly to everybody who's involved in the information technology business. So today, we've gotten together 5 people who are longtime, very popular, very intelligent, and for the most part, very beautiful speakers at Cloud Expo. And you may know some of them or all of them, or you may not. I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then we're going to jump into the topic, which is cloud computing in the COVID-19 era. We start with Ed Pedersen, who is a distinguished technologist with CTP Computer Technology Partners, which is an HPE company. To upper right, we have Judith Hurwitz, who is the founder, president, and CEO of Hurwitz and Associates. Down to the left, we have Gordon Half. Gordon is a technology evangelist with Red Hat. The first 3 are all from the Boston area for some reason, by the way. In the middle, we have our Australian who, despite his background, may be in Colorado at this point. It's Andy Mann, who's been a co-chair with Cloud Expo for many years and is a chief technology advocate with Splunk. And down in the lower right-hand corner, this is like, what's that old Hollywood Squares? Down in the old right-hand corner, we have Renee Bostick, who is the global VP of AI apps. I think of her as leading blockchain, which she's going to talk a little bit, but in her job and with what she does, there's a lot more to it than that. I do want to thank everybody so much for showing up, for taking the time to be here. Thank you very much. And for everyone watching, thanks too. Everyone's schedule's a little disrupted these days. One of the things that I've noticed, though, with all of you speak a lot at conferences. This must be the longest year ever. You don't get to go out and do your thing, you know, which I know is very, very difficult. So I'm glad we're here. I'm going to start with Judith. Judith does a lot of analysis and she writes a lot of books, and she always seems to have written a book on whatever the latest topic is, really on top of what the next wave is, and like right as those waves are crashing. So I'd like to start with Judith and just like to know, based on your current research and writing, you know, what sort of disruption have you seen because of COVID-19, and what have you seen organizations doing about it?
So what I think is interesting is that it's not that the technology has changed with COVID. I think what it's done is it's accelerated the way organizations are being forced by world events to take advantage of this highly distributed cloud environment in a way they haven't in the past, where they might have had, let's say, a 2-year plan to do some migration, to build new collaborations with customers and suppliers, a new way to approach customer experience, and they have accelerated that at a rapid pace because they have to interact with customers and partners in a brand new way where they didn't have to do that. They didn't feel the urgency.
Yeah.
I also think that they are reevaluating what they're going to spend money on, where they were not as pressed as they might have been 6 months ago. Now they're looking very closely at what are we going to spend money on. Let's take a look at our licenses for software, what we're spending money on, what can, you know, and companies are going in and saying, look, we have 5,000 licenses for all these random software elements in our data center. Half of them are not used. How can we push forward with things like cloud native applications and microservices that are much more adaptive and much more agile, rethinking business processes? And all of these are directly tied to the pace and innovation brought to us by the cloud.
Yeah, it seems like a little more urgency. Ed, I had prepped Ed with the most long-winded question ever, and I'm going to try to be a little more succinct. Having to do with lift and shift, a lot of cloud stuff that I've read is, you know, it really is lift and shift, and then a lot of repatriation is, you know, going back and and starting over again. And I think that's funny, but people who work in enterprise IT at a high level don't think it's funny at all. Have you seen more of an urgency or more innovation because of COVID-19, or are we still kind of in that lift and shift era, if my premise is correct?
It's been an interesting dichotomy depending on the various customers. I mean, to your point, a lot of the lift and shift is being repatriated, and rightly so. When lift and shift was the big thing, everybody was throwing everything into the cloud without looking at, does it actually belong in the cloud? And the ones that didn't are the ones that are being repatriated because they found out, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't really work or gain any benefit from the cloud. When COVID hit, I've seen basically three different camps in my client base on it. And this is all after they adjusted to trying to get to be able to remote work. Because a lot of people did not have remote work set up and everything. So their first priority was just being able to continue to operate. Then what I've seen with my clients is basically three different camps. I've seen one camp that is jumping back on the lift and shift bandwagon. It's like, we got to throw everything up into the cloud. It's the only way we're going to survive this.
Right.
We have to do it. And, you know, it's shoot, ready, aim kind of thing. And I've tried talking to them to point out the fact that they're going to end up just like the other lift and shifts and end up repatriating at least some of those workloads because they don't all belong up in the cloud. So that's one camp that I'm working with. Another camp that I'm working with are the ones that have slowed or stopped almost all cloud efforts at all, anything innovative. They're pulling in and tightening their belts and their budgets because they don't know what's going to happen. And they're like, we can't afford to do any risk right now. We just have to keep the lights on. And then the third camp are the ones that have tended to be the innovators to begin with. They were building cloud and going to cloud for all of the right reasons. They were architecting things to fit in the cloud. They were building hybrid environments because, quite honestly, there is no such thing as everybody going 100% to the public cloud. It doesn't work for everything you need to do. That case in point, back to the lift and shifts and bringing them back in. And those are the ones that I'm seeing. They're actually potentially increasing their investment into the cloud and speeding their move into the cloud because they see the benefit of it. Great examples of some of the challenges that I've seen is I had a particular client, a large banking institution, and they were just starting their cloud journey when COVID hit. And they got slammed when all of the federal bills were passed with the small business loan stuff and everything, and they got absolutely slammed with applications, and all of their systems basically came down around them. And so they're looking at it as, we need to start moving these things into the cloud so we can handle that type of scale going forward. Another great example I saw in my own state, Massachusetts, the unemployment insurance systems across the country. Massachusetts had recently moved their unemployment system assistance into the cloud before all of this started. So when they got hammered with all of the applications, they were better able to deal with the scaling challenges involved and in modifying the application to deal with the extra criteria that the feds needed on it, as compared to states like New Jersey that their system was still sitting written in COBOL on a mainframe. And A, not only did it not scale, B, trying to change and adapt it. We actually had requests coming in from several states of, do you guys have any COBOL programmers to help us come in here and modify these systems?
Right. Yeah, I'd read a lot about that. Now, Gordon, you were actually one of the first people I ever heard talking about Kubernetes and its potential, which isn't exactly what we need to talk about today, but you were kind of ahead of that one. And in your job, I think you deal a lot with hybrid cloud. Have you seen in the last few months any sort of movement towards hybrid cloud, or what have you seen, I guess is the best way to ask it, because there's a lot of dynamics going on here. Just what have you seen in terms of hybrid cloud and all the different technologies that it entails?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, to the point that Judith made about acceleration, we are absolutely seeing that. There's a sort of piece of, I guess you'd call it gallows humor going around of, what led to your current digital transformation at your companies? Who's driving it? Is it the CEO? Is it the CTO? Or is it COVID-19?
Right.
And that is the answer. The last was, of course, the answer.
I've seen that too.
Yeah. In terms of hybrid cloud, one of the dynamics that we're really seeing is around edge computing. You know, I remember back in the early days of cloud, like I'm sure Judith and others here do as well, when the cloud was going to be this compute utility that you just plugged into
the big
like
switch
grid. Yeah, the big switch. Nick Carr's the big switch.
I believe it.
Yeah, and and basically some of the response to that was people going, "Oh well, yeah, it's going to take people a while to move, but it's an inevitable move." And in fact, what we're seeing is a lot of the growth now is trying to get compute services closer to users or to the data. And so partly we're seeing repatriation for cost reasons, like Ed said, but we're also just seeing a lot of growth in compute infrastructure, really going from the cloud out to the edge. And given that sort of diversity of where compute is located, what you're seeing is a lot of organizations are going, well, this can't just be silos of stuff scattered all over the place. It really needs to be, it's never seamless interoperability in single pane of glass management or any kind of idealized fantasy like that. But there is a recognition that you do want common management practices and management operations and things like that going from the edge to the cloud as much as possible. Just one last point I'll make, and this pretty much echoes what Ed was saying, is that we see customers in clearly different categories. You've got the hunker downs, and we need to we still may do IT initiatives, but the focus is being on reducing costs, reducing liabilities. This is probably what you're doing if you were an airline today. And then you have a category that's really working to protect or really pivot some of their operations a bit. So somebody like Ford starting to make ventilators, for example, or all of these packaged good companies that have had to pivot from selling commercial toilet paper to making rolls that can be sold in the grocery store. So a lot of this streamlining, learning to work remotely, responding in an agile way. And then finally, again, as Ed said, you have people like the telcos, for example, who are faced with this massive scaling capacity demands. Many of them, are working with edge computing in areas like 5G and the like. And they're really seeing this as a way that they have to accelerate their business while still worrying about stability, of course.
Yeah. Andy, the enterprise IT not only handles a lot of data, it creates a lot of data. And I'm thinking now the monitoring analytics aspect, it must just absolutely be chaotic. I'm just trying to imagine, Gordon mentioned airlines, but so many businesses have just been slammed, and the level of business, the number of transactions, up and down, state by state is different. It's got to be absolutely chaotic. What have you seen in the last, few months because of COVID in terms of sort of increased chaos in the system and the need to be able to analyze it better? And what would you think about, do we need more automation? Do we need more human intervention? What's sort of going on in general in your world?
Yeah, Roger, it's really interesting to see how people are using data in this time of COVID and coronavirus, especially when it comes to cloud work and remote work. One of the biggest areas I'm seeing in terms of the data-driven decision-making people are, the businesses are making, is very much about this idea of, is remote work working? This has been an explosion. You talk about cloud. I don't think we could have pulled through this even as closely as we have as a technology industry without this ability to put people in offices at home and continue to do their job. I'm talking to people who are actually more busy because they're running cloud style businesses. So you think about the people running this platform, for example, working overtime because all of a sudden their growth rate exploded through the roof. You get so many businesses that are, their online digital business has exploded. And so they're looking to figure out, is it really working? So initially it's the remote work, the insights into what people are doing on their own systems, because you're all of a sudden starting to use additional networks, additional systems. You're not in control of endpoints. You have to Gordon's point, the edge, you're not in control of any of those endpoints. So using data to understand, is my VPN performing? Do I have enough sockets open? Am I getting response times? Are my people getting hung out to dry by lagging sessions? All of this, that's a really big part of it. But it's also the data about what is my business doing and where can I double down and where should I scale back? Because, we look at this, the digital transformation that Ed was talking about especially, and the acceleration that Judith was talking about, and I'm seeing a lot of two-speed stuff. I'm seeing some businesses, a lot of businesses accelerating like that. But I'm also seeing other businesses lose a lot in at least some channels. So multi-channel businesses now become single-channel businesses. So we need to figure out which channel is working, what data is telling us about that. And then the other area I'm seeing is just that.
Sorry. No, Roger. One of the things that sort of has not been mentioned is, as you have everybody, moving on to these cloud platforms to do their work and edge, the issue of securing all of the platforms. Now you've got a billion endpoints. Instead of having maybe 10 people working from home, now you have 5,000 people working from home, and now you're managing all of those endpoints, and you don't know what any of these people are operating in their home offices.
Right. And this is where
I was just going to jump in on the same thing, and to Andy's point about using Zoom as the example.
We'll get to you, Renee.
but just that, the challenges Zoom had when they scaled up, and all the security holes that people started identifying very quickly because they were getting used so much. But also, to Zoom's credit, how quickly they responded to all of that.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. It's been amazing. Each of the speakers, you've each set up the other person, and it's almost like there was a plan. You've each set the table for the next speaker in perfect order. And with Renee, I originally, before this, I briefed her and said, I want to talk about distributed ledger and the security aspects of it, and the utter chaos that's been going on that's increased the need for security. And so, Renee, if you could address everything that Andy said and the comments that were just made in terms of security, is that part of your world? To what degree is it? And what have you seen? And then the other aspect of it, of course, is you do AI stuff. It seems like there's never been a better time to try to improve security, whether it's distributed ledger, blockchain, or other ways, and try to improve things on the fly through AI. Am I close to what your world has been the last few months?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to definitely piggyback on what Andy was saying in regards to, single channel, multi-channel. And I will say during this era of COVID-19 that we're really consumer driven and we're data driven. And with that, kind of lens on it, one area that we're finding is that companies really didn't figure out immediately where things were, and that goes back to what Gordon was saying, where is all of the essentials like toilet paper, where's my hand sanitizer, where are all the ventilators, etc. And so what we have found, indeed, security is always first. You have to understand how you're going to secure not only your assets, your data, but your networks. But most importantly, what we found out is, how are you going to onboard your trading partners? So as an example, today I am working and I have a whole warehouse of goods, right? But if I am not on the Walmart approved vendor list, Walmart doesn't know that I have, you know, tons and tons of Sherman on the shelves. And so what has happened because of this, I would say, consumer-driven, data-driven environment that COVID has put us into, it has really accelerated. I've heard that a lot of terms here on the panel from Judith, right? Exactly right. It has accelerated the adoption of blockchain and technologies around the supply chain. And one term that you will hear, more of is this idea of business transaction intelligence. For a multi-enterprise. That's what you'll hear this term a lot. And it's how do I have visibility, right, of my orders through delivery? And, you know, as you know, Roger, we've been talking about Hyperledger, Fabric, we've been talking about blockchain and all the great capabilities around, you know, consensus and being able to have certificate authorities, et cetera. But what has happened is people saying, look, I understand Hyperledger native is great, but I need a platform. And those companies like IBM who have a platform where companies can then quickly onboard their trading partners and be able to share that common distributed ledger technology and be able to write records and so that people can have visibility into inventory, et cetera, that has really been where blockchain has been a star in particular.
But what I'm thinking is that I labored under the naive notion a couple months ago that this was going to go away, that we were going to get a vaccine, and maybe the vaccine will take a while, but it may not. What if we are, in fact, not even done with the first wave? What if, even if we had, say, a more unified response to it in the US, that we still couldn't stop it? You know, virus really doesn't care about our feelings or emotions. It doesn't think much. It seems like everything that you've talked about can't end up just being like a short-term gap. Okay, and one of these days we're going to return to normal. Now, what if we never return to normal? What we thought was normal? What if it gets a lot worse? And everyone just feel free to.
I was just going to jump in and piggyback on what Renee was saying. Renee and I have had numerous discussions around blockchain and supply chain, and all of us for years have known the challenges in the supply chain and in the supply chain systems out there. COVID highlighted it to the world. Everybody, wherever they are sitting at home, understands that the supply chains in this world are busting. And that we don't, you know, as much as Amazon made it look easy and simple for everybody, when all of this hit and all the supply chain problems got highlighted, it started affecting the average person at home. What we've been preaching came to life.
2 weeks of panic buying and we're out of stuff.
I mean, exactly. Yeah. And another thing, Roger,
and not knowing where stuff is. I mean, you know, material being shipped. You know, we had the problem in Massachusetts, you know, where our governor had ordered various PPEs and everything and had confirmed scheduled deliveries, and then they disappeared from the supply chain.
I think one thing that's very much been particularly highlighted, and again, I think this is something that people knew at some level, that sort of our just-in-time inventory systems and our ultra-tuned, efficient supply lines and so forth. I think it's really highlighted how really fragile those systems are.
Is it a matter of like one weak link, or is it just like a whole bunch of weak links? Renee, what are you saying?
Absolutely. And the thing is, you know, fragile supply lines are very efficient until somebody kicks out an extension.
It's almost like kinking a hose. You've got like this 5-mile hose and one little kink in it, and I've screwed up the entire hose.
I wanted to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I just wanted to say two quick things on Roger's question in regards to, you know, COVID and vaccines and such. I just want to first say that one area, and it goes back also what Gordon was saying, it's about the credentialing, right? How do you credential and onboard trading partners, right? So how can I then credential those partners very quickly so that I can, have all their credentials on the blockchain, lawyers can look at it, and operations can look at it and see that this is a valid trading partner, and in order to onboard in hours and not in weeks and not in days, right? Very quickly in hours. The second area that was really interesting is around out-of-state medical personnel, right? As an example, I heard people from Louisiana wanted to go help the hospitals in New York. And so you had to be credentialed. And it took so long in order for those nurses and doctors to go help. So this is another area where blockchain has indeed been able to add value. And that is all centered, if you can, again, around, specifically being able to show those credentials on the blockchain.
Everyone thinks the blockchain is going to disrupt the governments of the world, but in fact it can be used here in the United States. We're a federal system, and as you know, some people, the states are real important, and this is a way to get around a lot of that.
So the point I wanted to bring up is that one of the things that I think is the sort of the elephant in the room is the type of systems that we have relied on for things like supply chain. The older monolithic systems, if you talk to the users of these systems, the user interfaces are almost unusable until you've had like 6 months of training to know, okay, you've got to go to screen 17. So, and that makes them rigid, user environments, not very useful, not very intuitive. So as you have more of this change, that's where things like agility, microservices, a cloud native approach, it's going to drive us to rethink, these systems that have been around for decades.
It forces the issue, but are people really going to learn? It just seems like we never learn our lesson.
Well, and the thing is that back on the supply chain, what Judith was just saying, I mean, what she was describing, I refer to as user antagonistic systems.
Or user hostile.
Right, and to add to that problem in the supply chain, and Renee knows this well, is the amount of double entry that has to happen, because as you're moving from vendor to vendor to transporting that stuff through the supply chain, you go to the one bad system to get the information out of it, then go to another bad system and re-enter that information all over again, because they're not tied together, they're not talking the same language, and it's throw that monkey wrench into a complex machine and the whole machine just blows up.
But Judith, I mean, maybe it's not really your job to figure out if people are going to learn, but do you think, is this going to be a long-term change?
So I think a lot of it, it's going to separate the companies that are innovative and are going to say, okay, if we're going to survive this, and if we're going to be leaders in the next generation, because some upstart with no legacy, no base to protect, they're going to run right over us. So it's the companies that sort of get it and are not afraid. I mean, some of the large legacy companies whose customers are just locked into them, maybe they're going to be okay, but the companies that are sort of on the edge, if they don't get on the bandwagon of change, they're going to go away. We've seen, how many companies today that are like Fortune 500, what companies were on that list 10 years ago that aren't even in business anymore.
There's been a lot of disruption for the last 50 years anyway, and this seems to be, making it worse. I wanted to ask Andy real quick about your first, where you're talking was sort of like people's reactions. Have you seen any evidence that people are going to learn long-term and institute long-term changes into what they're doing? Or at this point, are they just still like reading what's going on and reacting to it?
No, I think we've gotten past a little bit of the initial shock. You know, certainly people who live in New England, I live in Colorado, you fall into a frozen lake. The first thing is the shock, and then you start to figure out what you're actually going to do. And so I think that's where we're up to right now. I see a lot of my customers, a lot of the businesses I talk to, figuring out what they're actually going to do, what sticks and what doesn't. I'll tell you what, I think remote work as an option at very least will be here. You know, Roger, you say with the new normal and, you know, is this how we're going to exist? So remote work will be here for a long time. We're seeing obviously distance and isolation. We're also seeing a reallocation of resourcing around things like physical locations versus virtual infrastructure. We're definitely seeing, to Ed's point, you know, people accelerating and moving to cloud. So what I see right now is people looking at data a lot of the time, of course, to figure out what's my return to reopening. What does that look like now?
But that's what I'm saying. What if it never really does? The way, I mean, it seems like there has to be so much, scenario planning, or you just try to be as agile as possible and react, you know, as it comes.
Yeah, Roger, I would say, I want to just admit,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I just wanted to say about, I would say that corporate responsibility has also pivoted back to what Andy was saying, and how you go back to work, how do you return to work. I know many of you saw when IBM stated that we would not invest anymore in facial recognition technology. Yes. And then soon after that, Microsoft followed, and then AWS followed. And I'm hoping, along with the whole industry as well as consumers, that there comes a corporate responsibility as we return to work, because based on what Andy was saying, in order for us to measure social distancing, you have to use like IoT technology, like beacon devices and such, you know, that I have on my person in order to know how far Ed is from me. So from that perspective, you know, again, like I said, corporate responsibility is going to be really, really key. And I know for sure IBM is going to lead the charge in that, along with, you know, others in the industry. But Andy, you're spot on. This whole return to work is very, very important, and we have to keep an eye on.
And Renee, just to follow up on that quickly, some of the other data points that we're seeing are things, you know, you're exactly right. Things like contact tracing. You know, if I've got certain people in a retail establishment, in a restaurant location, in my factory floor, certain people have gotten infections. How do I
schools? A month from now.
Don't get me started on that one. But
go ahead.
But I was going to piggyback on what you were originally talking about, Roger, on the planning for what's the world going to look like. The clients I have that are focusing more on the innovation pieces and are trying to accelerate their innovation, from their perspective, is if they plan for the world always looking like this, even if it doesn't, they're still going to be ahead of the game from an innovation perspective and from the service
that makes sense.
So it's sort of like, okay, assume the world is going to be like this forever. Build my systems that way. If it isn't, my systems are still in better shape now than if I hadn't planned that way.
Okay, so that implies that everything that people are doing is actually better. Something they should have been doing anyway. Is that what everybody's... You know,
so the ones that I'm talking to that are innovating, that it's accelerating the changes they already wanted to make to their systems, and but planning for it that way and accelerating it just helps them get there faster.
I wanted to ask Gordon on that line of. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going. Go ahead.
Let Renee go.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention.
It's all right.
Something that Judith said.
We all live in this world now. Go. It's okay.
I just wanted to mention something that Judith said and kind of piggyback for Ed and ask Ed a question. So as an example, we were talking about how many of the systems are not modernized today. So from an app modernization, being able to containerize a lot of those applications, we talk about COBOL, right, and such, and making sure that our mainframe systems come along with the journey. And so, Ed, I just wanted to get your and Judith's perspective on the whole acceleration and modernization of our mainframe environment.
Yeah, I'm starting to see a lot more activity on that, because just like COVID highlighted the problem with supply chain, COVID also highlighted the problem with all of these old systems. And not necessarily the fact that it's on a mainframe, but the fact that it's in a programming language that has been around since the 60s. and that they're actually having trouble finding people that know how to program in that language and be able to modify and adapt that application. That this kind of just raised a red flag of, oh crap, we've been ignoring it too long. We got to start dealing.
It's like we had the Y2K problem, and everyone was kind of overreacted to that. But this is one we didn't see coming or something.
So in terms of the mainframe, one of the innovations that I've seen that IBM is working on, because I've been looking a lot at this, is the way IBM has taken the mainframe and created what they call Linux One, which is basically the mainframe platform, but the operating system is not ZOS, the traditional mainframe operating system, but is Linux, supporting OpenShift with a Kubernetes foundation, and a lot of the same technologies that you would look at, you would see in a more modern system. What's sort of interesting about that is that, and I mentioned security. So if the level of security you can get in a mainframe platform that is Linux based and OpenShift based, which is containerized and cloud native, it sort of transforms the way people are thinking about the mainframe, which is very different. So companies that are looking at the mainframe as just sort of the high-end platform could be really interesting. So I think that there's been a lot of innovation on the mainframe that you would not expect.
I wanted to ask Gordon about, you mentioned Edge before, and everything that you've heard in the last 10 or 15 minutes. Could you integrate that with what you were talking about? Edge computing is, a new-ish term, and we've got the usual things happening. People saying, well, I've been doing Edge since before it was called Edge. We were doing Edge back in the 60s. Oh, yeah, right. And then you got people saying, well, you can't really define it. I haven't heard the term edge washing just yet, but it'll happen.
It's happening.
Okay, good. But in Gordon, in your world, when you mention edge, what are the drivers toward it? What exactly is it, and why? Is it a matter of you want to get the processing power closer to where it's needed because of latency, or because of security, or just because if you're an architect, that's the way you should think? What is it that's driving your thoughts about that in the context also of what we just heard about mainframes and other systems?
Well, mostly it's Andy's fault because his data is driving an awful lot.
That's a universal answer. You
right.
Just point to Andy and there you go.
I wouldn't blame Andy for everything. But
there has to be more to it than that. You don't get uphooked that easily.
I mean, it's basically a lot of things coming together. I think part of it was, as people were trying to drive more and more towards a public cloud, or even an on-prem data center, there was a recognition that this was really not the right architecture. And in fact, we needed to think about things more intelligently. And it sort of started out, I'd argue, with IoT, which, at least in the consumer sense of IoT, was often, I think, this very simplistic two-tier model. You had these dumb devices at the edge, and then you had a public, typically a public cloud. And then people in the enterprise came along and go, well, it's more complicated than that. You need an intelligent gateway out there. And then there was a recognition that, okay, that can deal with some of the data filtering and pre-computation and so forth, but it's still more complicated than that, because everything to do with computing is complicated. And therefore you need more tiers and more different places depending upon the kind of data you're working with. And you do want some commonality across this, because you don't want 5 or 7 or 10 different tiers that are all completely different from each other. So that you really need the organizations with complex IT requirements, which increasingly is an awful lot of organizations
Right.
really need to start about thinking about this whole thing as really as kind of an integrated entity at some level. And that is kind of my view of Edge. And in terms of where do you put data and where do you put computation, well, that's what architects get paid the big bucks for, because it can be data, it can be latency, it can be power, it can be resiliency, it can be replication. There's probably a good dozen different factors that go into.
It could also be governance, where you allow.
Absolutely. I mean, data governance is a big one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and then one thing I know, Roger,
yeah.
I know one thing that's very interesting. I've been speaking to several data scientists, and they say the biggest problem they have is waiting for IT to send the data. And so when you're talking about cloud computing, you ask us, the question is cloud really relevant during COVID? Think about how many data sets and data lakes that you have to really go through in order to compile what you've been doing for us, in your research on a daily basis. But that is one big benefit, right, of cloud computing, is now being able to curate all of that and have capabilities where you can give the data scientists the information where they need it. And it's going to take advantage of everything that Gordon just said around Edge.
Thank you for reading my tweets. That's by the way.
Let me just add one point in terms of the data. So speaking to a client from a big financial services company, and they were promised by their cloud vendor, we have unlimited storage for you. It's fast, it's efficient. And they had a huge volume of data. Yeah. And the platform, yes, they had a huge amount, but it was for everybody to share. So this company found that they actually had to keep some of that data across a few different clouds and some in the data center, because the promise of endless storage, endless compute is a fallacy.
Gordon, someone might have been Gordon. Someone mentioned seamless interoperability, which is a term I first heard in 1991 from Sun, and I'm surprised we don't have it. I may have actually written it a time or two, and I don't know why it's not here yet. So in the early days of cloud, I heard infinite scalability, and I may have written that a time or two as well in maybe promoting Cloud Expo, the promise of infinite scalability. And finally, maybe people are waking up to the fact that number one, it doesn't exist, but number two, if it did, you have to pay for it. It's not free. And Judith, is that maybe, okay, Judith mentioned earlier, updating her book, and wrote a book about cloud 10 years ago. And maybe the publisher said, well, just kind of update the here and there. And she's saying, no, we got to start over. I think so much has changed. Is that one of the things that you've changed, is more people are looking at it a little bit more hard-nosed and practical than, say, 10 years ago?
So a number of things. When we were looking at cloud 10 years ago, it was infrastructure and it was storage. Mm-hmm. And it was, okay, what workloads can you actually put in the cloud? Or maybe you could do testing on the cloud. There were, and standards are good. Now it's Kubernetes, it's microservices, it's hybrid. In fact, I wrote a book on hybrid cloud about 8 years ago, and nobody bought it because they didn't know what it was. So, and then you bring in, you actually have to have AI and what we call augmented intelligence in order to do this, because you can't sort of have somebody sitting there and say, oh, let me put this workload over there. Let me manage this data. And you've got to have a level of intelligent automation in order for all this to work in a predictable way.
And Judith, I agree on that. I just wanted to say something that Judith said. I agree, because the use cases, I think, have become more sophisticated, because when you wrote your book, remember when everybody said, hey, the one primary reason for cloud is for DR, right, and backup and recovery. And I will tell you, we have not heard any complaints about anybody's DR strategy during COVID. And so I agree with you. It's new applications, it's new use cases, and so I can't wait to read your new book.
Yeah. Now, Ed,
I mean, we were talking at the beginning when Judith first came on about the book that cloud is a moving target. It always has been, and it always will be.
Ed, you had mentioned 3 groups of clients, and without insulting any of them, the third group seems to be like more innovative. Is that your experience now? These things, what Judith was just talking about, and really thinking it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the 3 groups, they existed before this. COVID just kind of highlighted it, because you always had the people that thought, technology was the destination, and if I go to the cloud, all my problems are solved. Those are the ones that lift and shift everything. Then you got the ones that are always the laggards that turned into the hunkered down. Then you had the innovators that are, how can I use this to provide more business value? What can I do with it? How can I innovate and transform my business into something nobody thought about before?
Well, Andy, are you seeing that as well? Like groups of people, or do you see rough divisions of people into those groups, or are your customers really more innovative, generally speaking?
Well,
your world.
Far be it from me to say my customer is the most innovative in the world. It would stand to reason, wouldn't it? But no,
that's why I really want to talk about your world instead of your customers. Yeah.
And in actual fact, we look at it slightly differently. We're not even looking necessarily at these different groupings, but we look at the data that says what are people doing well and what are they not doing well. And we're actually seeing that people that access more data across more sources actually do better in their business. So we did research recently. You can find it at our website, spunk.com. There's my shameless plug for the day, where we looked into dark data and extending the access to data from multiple cloud sources, from edge devices, more investment in looking at data and making data-driven decisions. And we found that around about 10% of the customer base of the survey sample actually we're getting about a 5% reduction in cost, but also adding about 5% to revenue by being access more data from more sources across this multi-cloud. So it's a real thing for sure.
Okay,
and I thought so, Roger.
Go ahead.
No. I just wanted to add something that Andy had said. I also noticed, I don't know if anybody else has, that those companies that did innovate, they were able to create new revenue streams and new business models, and they did not close. I saw many restaurants, as an example, who didn't do takeout. And I'm like, why wouldn't you do that? And I think it's because that's what I was going to say to Ed, is that some companies just didn't have the foresight to create those new business models and be that group of innovators, right? And so I think as we look at now, in COVID-19, we're going into the second wave, that people should really, look at cloud again and say, how can I then be able to accelerate things that Judith has really stated, gain insights from data, as well as be able to deploy new applications on technology like OpenShift and open source technology. So, I really think it's time.
So I think Renee just answered what I'm going to ask now, but that's okay. We've reached the point where we're running out of time. And now, if everybody in the panel feels you didn't get enough time, then I've done my job. And if everyone who's watching feels the same way, it's the same thing. These are 5 people that you should be contacting and learning. But now, in the last few minutes, I'll start with Ed, because that's who I'm looking at first on my screen, and we'll work our way down to Renee. You got 1 minute or so. I'm not going to blow a horn or anything like that. But we've been talking about the past. We've been talking about kind of the present. But now here's the tough part. Here's where you make your money. Over the next 6 months, what are you going to tell people over the next 6 months, given all the possible scenarios, what should they be doing? What are the top, 1, 2, or 3 things they must think about when it comes to cloud computing between now and the end of the year? Start with Ed.
I mean, ultimately for me, they need to not be afraid and go into innovating and not expect the magic to just happen by itself. They have to design and they have to plan for it. Cloud to me is the technology piece actually is quite easy. It's getting the people, process, and culture in their organizations to understand that it's a different way of doing business. And until you accept that, just having the technology isn't going to get you there. So that's a conversation I have with all my clients all the time. So the ones that are innovating get it, and they're doing it. The ones that are trying to do the lift and shift are starting to listen to me, and they're starting to switch over into the innovation side. The hunker down's a little bit more of a struggle, but I still work on them on a regular basis to try and get
That's good. Don't give up hope. Judith.
Yeah, so I think cloud is the future. It's really about how do you do distributed computing based on business opportunities. It has to be a collaboration between the business side and the IT side. If you lose out on that, you're probably going to be in opposite ends of the spectrum, and you're not going to make progress.
Okay, Gordon. Gordon. I do mean Gordon. Sorry, I double clutched. Gordon.
So I think if there are some companies out there that are just very, very challenged in their business because of business models, customers, etc. And in some level, many of them may not have an awful lot of choice. But I think the general advice is, if at all possible, you've been hunkering down, waiting for all this to be over, just stop. You have to deal with your processes. Yes, you do need to deal with your technology, although as Ed said, that's fine. And I think the good news is to maybe introduce just a little ray of optimism here is that I think in some ways we're very lucky today. If this had happened 15, 20 years ago, I honestly think it would be very difficult to have pulled through. I mean, the environment will have been different in other ways as well, but from a technology standpoint, certainly, remote work 20 years ago on a large scale. I mean,
we have the tools today. We have the agility.
We absolutely have the tools here. So not to minimize the difficulties that many businesses are going through, but for a lot of businesses, if you're just sort of saying, I just can't deal with this and I'll hope it'll be over soon, you might well rethink that.
That's the topic for our next discussion. We have the tools. We're going to have another one and talk about we'll get into open source and all that good stuff. But for now, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, just to summarize, obviously I'm going to tell you, bring data to your decisions, right?
Right, well, you have to.
To understand what your business is doing, to understand what your customers need, and honestly, to understand what your humans are feeling and if they're coping in this new world. Apply analytics to that data, right? The complexity, Judith's point, it's everywhere, so much data all over the place. You've got to apply advanced analytics, machine learning, AI, identify patterns, which is going to tell you where is your strength in your business, where is the weakness, and be realistic about that. And make sure you're getting that data from all those sources, right? No samples, no silos, full visibility across the data sources from cloud, from customers, from on-prem systems, including our venerable mainframe friends, from edge devices, and get a full picture. This is the only way we're going to get a handle on all of this and a realistic, objective way forward.
Okay, Renee.
Yes, so one thing I would say is we really need to take advantage of this period before we are heading into the second wave of COVID, and really advising customers to do a lessons learned, right? From where we were when we started until this point, really reflecting. This is now, I really think, a time of reflection on your systems, what worked, what didn't work. And then most importantly, look at your ecosystem. I think many times we think, how do we scale? We talked about scalability here. Look at your ecosystems, your trading partners, how you can build those systems to have a really supply chain resilient, process and way of doing business moving forward. Because I promise you, as the second wave starts, The toilet paper's going to go.
And what else?
Lights,
Yeah.
everything, right? Right. So let's show the world that IT can do it, and that we have really resilient supply chains, and this will never happen again. So that's my 2 cents.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It's too bad we can't be together. I wish I could be with all of you and give you big hugs, even Ed, you know, and but at some point,
who wants to do?
at some point, I can't help myself. You can all punch me when you see me again. Someday we will be together again. We'll be together with your colleagues, and if it doesn't return to normal, maybe a sense of normalcy. It's great discussion, great to hear about all the different ways that enterprises who live in the real world can deal with the situation. The tools are available. So thanks everybody for joining. I hope everyone enjoyed watching, and I hope to see all of you and all of you watching sometime soon. Thanks for Cloud Expo and Cloud Expo TV. This is Roger Struckoff. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Roger.
Thanks,
See ya.
Roger.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Roger.